Hi, this is Lindley Amick, and welcome back to Empty Plates, Full Stories, the podcast where we talk about food insecurity in Evansville. Today, we are joined by Lisa Vaughn from Feed Evansville, who we're just going to talk about food insecurity with and what she does for the community. So, if you don't mind starting off, just explaining what you do at Feed Evansville, what you guys do for the area when it comes to like food insecurity.
Yeah, that's great. My name is Lisa Vaughn. I'm the executive director of Feed Evansville. Um, it's kind of what don't we do to help food insecurity? We're not a traditional pantry. So it's kind of hard to explain that to everybody because I think that's kind of what people think of when they think of food insecurity in the urban areas. They go, oh, well, you're going to be a food program, you're a pantry, hand things out. No, I call us a system coordinator. So basically, our goal has always been to see a need, fill the need, and work with everybody in that sphere. So we basically are managing and the admins of the Mayor's Commission on Food Insecurity. We are the admin and run the community kitchen at CK Newsom Center. And we basically are coordinating constantly and educating and training people on what food insecurity is, what it's not, and what we can do to elevate food security in the Vanderbilt County area.
That's That's amazing. So you see a lot of the behind the scenes stuff of the food insecurity and filling food pantries, and you work with a lot of them, including like the mayor's office and stuff. Why do you think it is such a persistent issue in the Evansville area? Like, what would you say the causes are behind it?
Well, first of all, knowing what food insecurity is going to help you kind of understand what's causing food insecurity climb. Okay, so first and foremost, the definition of food insecurity that came from a World Hunger Summit is basically that all citizens in your surrounding area, neighborhood, community, whatever that area is for you, has access to nutritional value food at all times. Okay. So then you have to look at the components of food insecurity. Food insecurity happens if you have an availability issue. That means there's not enough food for your surrounding area. That's not the case with us. We're surrounded by farmland.
Mm.
Food is available, right? Then you have access issues. Can you get to the food that's available? Can you drive to the grocery store? Can you walk to the grocery store? All those things. Then you have use and utilization. So, use and utilization is, can my body take the food that's given to me and can my body break it down to the nutritional value? So, I have celiac disease. If you give me a bag of flour, what am I going to do? Right? Utilization is also, do I know how to utilize the food? So when I'm handing out pumpkins, which I have done to people, and they're like, how do you eat a pumpkin? Right? They don't know what to do with it. They're still going to be food insecure.
Mm.
Then you have stability. Stability means I know where my next meal is coming from. Okay. And you can have food insecurity on a short term basis. You can have food insecurity on long term basis. So really you have to look at those four components and go, oh, we have an access issue. We
Mm.
don't have a really good public transportation system in the Evansville, Vanderbilt County area, right? We have some neighborhoods, in fact, 40%, according to the USDA, says that most of the neighborhoods in Evansville are food deserts.
Mm.
That means there is not nutritional value food. Nutritional value food is fresh produce, fresh dairy, fresh meat. Okay. We have food swamps. So, do we have fast food chains on every corner? Do we have, quick in and out marts on every corner? That's more of a food swamp than a food desert. So, we just kind of have to look at those conditions and say that's why we have a rising
Yeah.
situation. I think a lot of people like to narrow down food insecurity into poverty. Poverty could be a factor, but you could live out in the county and have money and still be food insecure because you're not in walking distance of fresh dairy, fresh produce, and things. So that means the cost of your gas, the cost of living, the cost of food has just risen in that household. Now, are they food insecure in you know, um, I guess I would say a day to day hardship? No, but it's still a cost of living difference for what the average person would have to pay.
Mm,
So you have to still say, well, that's still food insecurity. It's a just different form of it.
yeah. And absolutely, there's a million different reasons for why it can go on. Uh, what would you say is the most common misconception about people who utilize food banks, either temporarily or long term? And why do you think like certain people are more affected based on maybe where they live or their job or occupation or income and stuff like that?
Well, I think the most misconception is, oh, they don't have a job, they don't work. That's just not true. If you look even at SNAP numbers, the majority of people, and we have over 9,000 households in Vanderburgh County that are SNAP recipients, they all have jobs, right? However, if you look at the type of jobs that that particular demographic has, they have jobs where it's maybe seasonal work. It's, they're in construction. So if they get a bad storm, they're out of work for 2 weeks, or they have this, or income can flux, they're waitressing, things like that. So, and those are reports that are coming from the government, that they're looking into things. So, but most people have a job. Um, I also think there's a misconception about poverty. People think, oh, it's because there's not resources, low resources. No, that's a trickle effect of poverty. I've always found out that poverty happens because of choices. That doesn't mean the individual is always making the choices. Some choices have been made for you. Some choices have been made by an institution. Some choices have been made in the family. Some choices have been made by yourself. But what happens is no one takes an effect of mental health. If we treated mental health the way we treat physical health in our country, things would be a lot different because it's just the same. They go hand in hand, but we don't. We separate them and we have, well, that's not mental health. That's just personality. No, there's mental health there. So I think the misconception just is that people are just looking for a free hand. I don't know anyone, and there probably are some, and I've met them, but I don't really know anybody that's going to stand in line for 3 hours for a $20 food box.
Mm,
And if they are, that is mental health, right? And that's part of why they're there. So, there's also a misconception that people are playing the system. But when any research I've ever done or looked up has always been that food insecurity, ab- abusing the system has been about a 5%. And I just kind of look at everybody. I'm like, I'm not the food police, and I have never met a human being in this whole world that doesn't have to eat. So if someone gets a box of food and that helps them, and it, you know, does something for them, we're all good.
mm,
So I think the biggest misconception is that, well, if they just worked more or they pulled their boots up, well, you can't pull straps up for things you don't have.
yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. So you work with food banks all across Vanderbilt, Evansville County. What would you say are the biggest challenges in keeping volunteers coming back or keeping the food pantry stocked or things like that, working with so many big food pantries across the community?
yeah, so I work really closely with the Tri State Food Bank, have a really great relationship with them, and they really kind of oversee the pantries because that's where the pantries get the majority of the food that they then donate. But I work with all the food programs and we work with businesses and legislatures and everything. But what I'm finding out is the biggest hardship is having some type of consistency
Mm,
when you go from one program to another. One program will just like lay food out and say you can take all you want. Well, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the lowest form, though, of food programming you can do for an individual, right? Then you have others that have really moved to more of a grocery store method, which then eliminates the use and utilization problem that I was talking about. And that's a little bit higher level. So, having kind of training on trauma informed care and dignity and diversity and inclusion and having different types of foods, I think is the biggest struggle because those all take money.
mm,
And then getting everybody on board, they're like, well, this is how we've always done it. So that's hard for the volunteer to go, I'm just here to hand out food. And this woman wants to make this more complex. It's not that I want to make it complex, but I think when you need to have a standard of care.
Mhm.
when you're dealing with human beings, and you need to be serve safe, and you need to have a standard of care for that food that you're handing out. Think about how vulnerable someone is going to a pantry. Put yourself in that situation. I already have to swallow my pride and like admit that I don't have the funds to maybe feed my kids. That's devastating for a parent. I mean, forget to pick my kids up after practice because they switch the time, and I'm like, I'm the worst mother in the world. So I mean, so put yourself in all of that other situation, to have to look at somebody and saying, I need a box of food. And then have someone say, well, this is what we have today. You can take it. And you can't go, well, I don't like that.
Yeah.
You get to pick what you eat. I get to pick what I eat. My kids get to pick what they eat. You see what I'm saying? I
Mhm.
mean, within reason. But it takes a lot of pride and a lot of vulnerability to step forth in any of these types of programs, housing, clothing, all of that. And to then have to somehow, society tells you they have to be thankful.
Mm.
And so it's not that I want to make it complex. I want humans to be humans.
Right.
And I think that's the struggle with some of the volunteers. The other struggle is that culturally volunteerism is on the decline. You see that happening in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, scouting. I'm a member of the Junior League of Evansville, a women's organization that empowers women to be civic leaders. You know, everyone's at work. So that they want to go home. They want to relax. Um, they want to come in, do something, and leave. Well, this type of work means having safety and trust. So you have to build relationships. So having that type of trauma informed care training with volunteers is really what I think is the most difficult thing happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point you bring up with you balancing the empathy side of it, but also there is a certain standard we have to have because this is a sensitive issue for some people. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, and if I can piggyback on that, and I don't, how much time we have, but, you know, to be fair, there's times where I am not probably the most empathetic
Mm.
in line. That's usually when someone's calling me a name or something. And that's where you have to take a step back and I remind everybody very clearly, I'm like, listen, we'll just close down today. If we're not all going to be in this together and we're not going to have a frame mind and you're going to treat volunteers poorly, because you're vulnerable, because you're frustrated,
Mm.
because when people act out, I don't care who you are, when you act out and you're yelling, you've lost control, right? And when that happens, that's usually because there's a fear. Everyone will say, oh, it's this or that. It's always borderline fear first, and you're covering up that fear with other emotions. So, knowing that and knowing how to deal with that. So, I mean, if I could tell you the names that I've been called, you'd be appalled, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's like, well, I mean, I'm a volunteer. I don't get paid to
Yeah.
do what I do. But in general, I started off as a volunteer. Maybe one day I'll get a paycheck, that's on me. But I, you can't be abused either on the other side of it. So you have to know how to navigate it and let it slide, but also how to look at them and say, that behavior is not acceptable, and others around you usually step up that are in the line and go, no, no, we're not going to treat the volunteers today poorly. But it's a balancing act all the time.
Right.
So I have to look at both sides of it. I can't just say, oh, volunteers need to step up and be better. We all as human beings need to step up and be better,
Yeah.
including myself.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, talking about volunteering and reaching out, but beyond maybe donating or volunteering to food banks, what do you think are other ways that a person in the community can impact or help decrease food insecurity or fight against it in the community?
Yeah, well, volunteering is a huge thing. I mean, when we have our holiday lines, we need at least 100 volunteers there because we're handing out over 2,000 boxes that day. It's huge, right? And that's households. So if you think about it, if you the average household is, four people and they all show up, that's a lot of people to corral, to navigate, to get everybody going, right? So physical bodies is always the most important thing. Don't assume someone else is doing it, right? The other thing I would be is to be mindful, the low hanging fruit of what you can do, be mindful in your home of your food waste, be mindful of your donations and things like that. Don't let food sit in your cupboard and expire and then go donate that food,
Right.
right? And then financially helping these organizations is actually really significant because I only have so much storage. So if you go to the store and you buy a bunch of stuff and you give it to me, I might not need that particular item right now, right? I might not have room for it right now. So what happens is now I'm going to have to hand all that food out in a flux and then have a drought later.
Right.
Another thing is I have purchasing power that you do not. I have different contracts with food distributors, with farmers, and different things, and I can take your dollar and sometimes stretch it out to six. So, giving the organizations money and then showing up and helping them with the work is really the best way possible. The other thing is to advocate.
Mm.
Be mindful um, of food insecurity in general. Don't assume that it's for somebody else to do. It's something we all do all the time. We all eat food. We're all part of the food community chain. Sometimes you're receiving food, sometimes you're giving food, sometimes you're cooking the food. So, and sometimes you're purchasing the food. Also, hold our legislators and our businesses to a better standard. You know, um, we need to understand what laws are being passed. We need to understand what ordinances are being passed. I think too often we don't really know what's going on. Not that this is about food, but right now there's a bill talking about, how being homeless is a crime. There's a lot more to that bill than just that, but that's the headline, right? Don't jump if that bill's good or bad. Read it. Take a moment. If you can read the paper, you can read a legislation bill,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And then call your local government and your local reps and talk to them about what you like about it and what you don't like about it. Bills always come out one way and they always get voted in and leave a different way. So I tell everybody I don't get too excited. I don't jump on the bandwagon for any bill. I look at it and read it. But these are serious things that have trickle effects on programs, and we make a lot of assumptions of what programs are helping and not helping. There's a lot of programs out there that are not effective, right? But the money's there for them, so they keep going. Also, be mindful about what programs you are giving to. It's great if we're all just passing out food. I pass out food, right? But are there standards there with passing out food? Are you doing it under health code regulations? Are you doing temperature checks on this food? Again, most vulnerable population, they deserve more than just a box of food. There's so much more to it than that.
Right.
Mm.
Absolutely. I think education is always such a great place to start with anything having to do with social issues, but especially this. All right, I have one last question for you. If you could say one thing to everyone in Evansville about food insecurity and educating people about it, what would you say?
I would say that food insecurity is all around you. It's Food insecurity has no um, ethnicity barriers. It has no classification barriers when it comes to someone's, level
Mm.
of, their job or their class. It has no religious barriers. It has no gender barriers. Food insecurity happens to people,
Mm.
period. And we often forget that food insecurity, when I said it before, can happen immediately and it can happen long term. So if you have a house fire tomorrow, you're food insecure. Your car breaks down and you've always been able to make the bills, but man, that's $1,000 repair. You're probably going to be food insecure, right? So we have to understand that food insecurity can take place really quickly. And we also need to understand that it's happening to people that live right next door to us. Um, and we need to have some compassion and love around those things. And again, I think being mindful before we jump to a conclusion is always helpful. If a young kid is in the cafeteria and he's taking 5 apples, Be inquisitive. Ask, why are you taking 5 apples? Not, um, we need to save some for others. We can still have that conversation. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is he taking 5 apples because he's got 4 siblings at home and he wants to make sure they can get an apple too because getting an apple in his house is a luxury? They don't get it that often.
Mm.
And finding out what's going on.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's really powerful to think about it that way. Well, that's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for coming in to join me today, and we'll see everyone next time on Empty Plates Full Stories. This was Lindley Amick.